Hello, 'tis I, Sherlock Holmes. If you remember what I said last time, I was on the trail to find the Hound of the Baskervilles. Found a lot of research about it, and believe it or not, it turns out that the Hound of the Baskervilles became a lot more popular than any of my stories in history. According to this book here, Sherlock Holmes, Hound of the Baskervilles, by the Strand Magazines, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It was the most famous book in history. Now, one thing I want you to know, what you're going to be asking me is, what the heck is the Hound of the Baskervilles? Well, the Hound of the Baskervilles is actually a hellhound. Now, if I say hellhound, what kind of hellhound would you think? What comes in your mind when I say hellhound? No, that doesn't count. Even though this one's from Greek mythology, Cerberus, the three-headed hellhound, that is the gatekeeper of the underworld, and only be controlled by Hades himself. But this is a hellhound I'm going to mention to you folks. They say in legends that hellhounds are actually wild dogs from the fiery pits of hell. Some people say it's an omen. There was one legend I heard that one time there was a hellhound who came after a church because the owner of the church was a sinner and pretty much burned that church to the ground with his fiery breath. And even that church has been remained in history. And a lot of people say that it's also a prophecy. Every time when somebody sees a hellhound, that means something bad's gonna happen in the future. Something terrible. And also, now I hear that in the hellhound's legend, now they become navigators, guides. Because there was one story I heard, there was a woman who was walked out in the woods, and she was completely lost. And from out of nowhere, out comes the hellhound, who shows up, but didn't growl at her or attack her, although she can see his red, glowing eyes. He pointed her the direction where to go, and she was no longer lost anymore. And after that, she never saw that hellhound ever again. So now these hounds from hell are now helpful members of society? But the hellhound I'm going to talk to you is none other than the Hound of the Baskervilles. A demon dog who curses the Baskerville family. And of course there is also a legend involved. And here's the legend, folks. Centuries ago, there was a really rich, cruel man who goes by the name of Sir Hugo Baskerville. He was so awful that his eyes impaled a very beautiful girl who is one of the farmer's daughters. So what he done is he broke in to the farmer's house and kidnapped the girl out of her own free will and locked her up in his own room. And while he was busy partying, getting himself drunk, partying and getting himself intoxicated, the girl finally escaped from the window. And from Sir Hugo's hatred, he decided to set his hound dogs after her. And of course he got her handkerchief to track the scent. And he got on his horse, and he said to his drunk friends, "I will find her, and I'll have her. And if I will not have her, I will be damned if I will not have her." That's what Sir Hugo said. Well, during the time when Sir Hugo was on the trail, he finally found her, and they both struggled. And then one time, Sir Hugo heard a howling sound. All of a sudden, his friends heard a scream. So they were tracking to see where that scream coming from. And that's what his friends saw. They found Sir Hugo and the girl. But strangely, the girl, she died from fright. Horror scared her to death. Because what she saw scared her too much that it gave out her heart. And as for Sir Hugo Baskerville, they found his body with his throat slashed by a huge dog about the size of a wolf. And this dog, his whole entire fur glowed green with burning red eyes and blood dripping from his mouth. And therefore they say it's the curse of the Hound of the Baskerville, that the Hound from hell had cursed the Baskerville family. For any descendant who ever goes to his inheritance will be cursed by the Hound, and the Hound will get any descendant of the Baskerville family and drags them down to hell with the Hound. Of course, that was just a curse, the legend. I bet those men were intoxicated and they were so drunk they hallucinated. And now in the case, Sir Charles Baskerville, they found his body, scared to death over what he saw. So now the last descendant of the Baskerville family is Sir Henry Baskerville from Canada, who got his inheritance. He made his fortune in Canada, and now he's being inherited from the Baskerville family, so he goes out in the moor, but he was threatened, warning him that bad things would happen to him if he goes out in the moors. I never will get used to those helicopters, they call them. So now, Dr. James Mortimer has hired me to protect Sir Henry. But of course there was a case I had to deal with, blackmail. So I decided for my dear friend Watson to join with Sir Henry and make sure nothing bad never happens. Little does he know, I went on a different I was on a different train. Not letting people know that I came to Baskerville Hall, but only my friend Watson showed up. It would lay off the scent. because I secretly went to Baskerville, reading all the letters that Watson gave me. And there was a lot more into it. The Moors... Let's just say there is more evil out there than I ever imagined before. But at the same time, there was an escaped convict who goes by the name of Seldom. Escaped from the prisons out in the moor, so now there's a lot of state troopers. A lot of state troopers looking after him. And of course there was the servants, the butler and maid, who are husband and wife, the Barrymores. Turns out that they are related to Selden. And then the Hound mistakes Selden as Sir Henry and died. And as I showed up to Watson telling him what I was really close to make a long story short, it turns out that the murderer who is responsible for all this was, of course, Stapleton. How can I tell it was Stapleton? Well, I looked at the painting of Sir Hugo himself, and as I looked real close, he had a remarkable resemblance to Stapleton. So it turns out that Stapleton, he himself is a Baskerville. And the reason why he's killing all the other members of the Baskerville family, so he can inherit their estate. And a Hound from hell? Let's just say that he bought himself a biggest dog he ever found, covered him with phosphorus, and he also done something to his eyes to make his eyes look all red, making him blind. And also starving him for like a day or so, and also stolen Sir Henry's boot so he can pick up the scent. But as the Hound was about ready to attack Sir Henry, Watson and I and Dr. Mortimer got our guns ready, and we fired the dog. And then I deduced it was Stapleton. Stapleton didn't escape, though. Let's just say that the Moors got him. He was trapped and was sucked down in the quicksand of the moors. And that was Hound of the Baskerville for you. And as I looked up the Hound of the Baskerville, it turns out that there were tons of movies made throughout history. It all started in 1921. Hound of the Baskerville, 1921. Starring Ellie Norwood as Sherlock Holmes. This one here was the first Hound of the Baskerville ever made. And then there was a Baskerville movie made in the 30s from this mystery collection here, but actually it was called Murder at the Baskerville. It had nothing to do with the Hound, so the Hound wasn't in it, but my arch nemesis Moriarty was in it, and he was about ready to kill Sir Henry. And also picking a little bit of the other story, The Silver Blaze, a story about a racehorse involved. But this had nothing to do with the Hound, so that's just forgotten. But the most famous one of all was the one played by the great Basil Rathbone. And this was Basil Rathbone's first Sherlock Holmes movie he ever starred in. And it's none other than Hound of the Baskerville, 1939. This was a double movie special, so I'm just focusing more on Hound of the Baskerville and not the other one. But it was starring Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, Nigel Bruce as Watson, and of course Richard Green as Sir Henry. And this was the most memorable of Sherlock Holmes and the Hound of the Baskerville than ever. And sadly, poor Basil Rathbone was typecast as Sherlock Holmes. After all those movies, he played as Holmes. And then there was another studio called Hammer, who got themselves involved with the Sherlock Holmes, decided to make their own version of Sherlock Holmes, made in 1959, and it's Hammer's Hound of the Baskerville, starring Peter Cushing as Sherlock Holmes and Christopher Lee as Sir Henry Baskerville. Christopher Lee, yours truly. And of course, there was also another Sherlock Holmes, another Hound of the Baskerville movie they made. It was a TV movie from the BBC, made in 1968, starring Peter Cushing, of course. Then in 1972, there was Hound of the Baskerville 1972, starring Stuart Ginger. And believe it or not, that movie has one of the most memorable actors in history, and it's none other than Star Trek's William Shatner as the sinister Stapleton. And then all of a sudden they decided to get themselves into comedy with two great British comedians who made their first Sherlock Holmes comedy ever made throughout history. Made in 1978, and it's none other than Hound of the Baskerville, 1978, starring Peter Cook as Sherlock Holmes and Dudley Moore as Watson. This here, without a doubt, was the first comedy Sherlock Holmes ever made, involving the Hound of the Baskerville. And do you know there were other Hound of the Baskerville made in different countries? One made in Germany. There was one made in Germany, but there's another one made in 1981 that is more memorable, but this one is from Russia. And it's none other than Russian Hound of the Baskerville 1981, starring Vasily Lavanos as Sherlock Holmes. Some people say that even for a Russian movie, it was the best Hound of the Baskerville ever made, among others. Other Sherlock Holmes they've done in Russia. Now, unlike this one Hound of the Baskerville, where it had Star Trek's William Shatner, there was a Hound of the Baskerville starring one of the actors who is in Doctor Who. None other than Hound of the Baskerville 1982, starring Doctor Who's Tom Baker as Sherlock Holmes. Whoever thought Tom Baker, the most famous actor who is mostly remembered as the Doctor from Doctor Who, played the world's greatest detective, Sherlock Holmes. Imagine that. And there's one in 1983, Hound of the Baskerville, 1983, starring Ian Richardson as Sherlock Holmes. Now, some of you may not know Ian Richards, but he plays the bad guy in the British version of House of Cards, and he also played Dr. Joseph Bell. And for those of you who don't know who Joseph Bell is, he was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's inspiration from Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Joseph Bell was a medical doctor who has a keen power of observation just like the real Sherlock Holmes have. So Dr. Joseph Bell was the real Sherlock Holmes. Now, here is the most famous one of all, This one was played by an actor where everybody say, without a doubt, this was the most famous actor who played Sherlock Holmes and the best actor who ever played Sherlock Holmes ever in history. Started back in 1988, and it's none other than Hound of the Baskervilles, 1988, starring the late great Jeremy Britt as Sherlock Holmes. Jeremy Britt was the most famous Sherlock Holmes actor in all history. And then in the year 2000 came about, they decided to make a new Sherlock Holmes. And this one started back in 2002. And it's none other than Hound of the Baskervilles 2002. Now, this one was the least favorite of all Sherlock Holmes and Hound of the Baskervilles franchise, because too many people were getting killed in this one. Only Watson and Holmes. And the actor who played Sherlock Holmes, he acted more sinister than how the real Sherlock Holmes is supposed to be playing. The real Sherlock Holmes is supposed to be playing as a caring person. And then in 2009, there was another one. Hound of the Baskervilles, starring Matt Farrow as Sherlock Holmes. This one was made in Canada, and guess what entertainment this came from? Hallmark. This was a Hallmark Sherlock Holmes movie they made. Hound of the Baskervilles, The Curse of the Whitechapel Vampire, and The Royal Scandal. Starring Matt Farrow as Sherlock Holmes. And then in the TV series, the Sherlock Holmes from the TV series got themselves into it too. Sherlock Season 2, Episode 2, Hound of the Baskervilles, where Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes gets himself involved in the Hound of the Baskervilles. And also, for the Americans, the show Elementary got themselves involved too. On Elementary, Season 2, Episode 16, Hounded. That's what it was called. I guess Sherlock Holmes never ends, and especially on children's shows as well. Because the next one I'm going to tell you is none other than on the kids' TV show on PBS, 1995, Season 1, Episode 8, Wishbone, the Hound of the Baskervilles. Imagine a dog playing Sherlock Holmes for a kids show. No less. What's going to be next? Sherlock Holmes is going to be a dog for some kids' animation? Oh yes, Sherlock Hounds, a Japanese animation from 1984 to 1985. Me as a dog, that is awful. I guess the Hound of the Baskervilles will never end throughout history. Although multi-voice reviewer mentioning something to me about something that would be a good idea. Instead of a Hound of the Baskervilles, there should be a werewolf. Werewolf of Baskerville. I solved the case of the Sussex vampire and the Hound of Hell. What makes you think I'm going to solve a case about a werewolf? Well, for those of you who likes this Hound of the Baskervilles review, please leave a comment down below, hit like, subscribe, and Elementary, my dear watchers. Because the next review I'm going to do, folks, I'm going to talk about the movies starring the actor who I got the voice of, Christopher Lee. I'm going to talk to you about the movies that Christopher Lee starred in that are Sherlock Holmes and his involvement of Sherlock Holmes. So, see you soon. I'm on the case of the Hound. Made you look. See ya, folks.